Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome back to another review. Up today it is a brand new locomotive, almost said steam locomotive there, but today that is very much not the case. I am very excited about this model. It's a model that's been on the cards for a very long time and finally, in fact just a couple of days ago, it was delivered. So the loco is this. It is the all-new KR Models GT3 Gas Turbine locomotive, available for the very first time in 00 gauge. And this locomotive, this model, has been on an incredible journey. It was announced 2.5 years ago, back in 2018, and wow, it has been quite a trip since then. I mean, when KR Models first announced this, they were a new name in the industry. There was a lot of skepticism. I heard it said that KR Models was a scam. They had no intention of producing the model. All sorts of rumours flying around. And then Worley came along in 2019 and KR Models started showing samples for the model, and I think it was at that point that people started to believe that this model was actually genuine and it was actually happening. And then after that the pandemic hit and everything was delayed and the model was set back. Oh, it's been a real journey, like I say. But finally the model has been delivered and it is right here in my hands, unopened, but hopefully ready to go. So I bought and paid for this quite a long time ago. I've had it pre-ordered probably about 2 years now, something like that. I paid for it in 3 instalments and in total it cost £185. So that is a lot of money. It's pretty expensive. It's well up there with the major manufacturers, sort of Hornby Bachmann type price, which is fair enough though. I mean, this is KR Models' first and only model at the moment. What an undertaking it is as well. I mean, most manufacturers might start with a little tank engine or something, maybe just a wagon. Not KR Models. Not only have they gone for a large tender locomotive, but it is a completely unique and totally unconventional locomotive, a gas turbine. What even is a gas turbine? That was my question when they were first announced. So we'll see what this is like. If you're interested in getting one for yourself, I believe KR Models have opened up a second run of these. So if you visit their website, you will be able to pre-order one. I believe they are a little bit more expensive now. I think they're £199 now, so it is a lot of money. Whether or not the model will justify that price is yet to be seen. But do you know what? We're going to find out today. So I'm going to stop yakking on about this. Let's get this out and for the very first time see what the GT3 is like. Very excited about this. Let's do it. Alright then, the GT3, and I do like the packaging. It's got this really clean sort of white and red design. I'm guessing this is what the KR Models packaging is going to look like then. I guess this is what they've settled on. It's really nice and stylish. I do like it. When it first arrived, I was a little bit concerned because there was very little in the way of packaging. It was literally this box wrapped in cellophane and stuffed into a slightly larger cardboard box. There was nothing in the way of bubble wrap or anything like that, so I really hope the internal packaging is good quality and that the loco hasn't been damaged at all. Wouldn't have hurt to include a little bubble wrap though, would it? Just because of how expensive this is, you want to give locos the best chance of actually arriving in one piece. Fingers crossed that will be the case. Let me show you the end of the box then. So this is the GT3 00 gauge DCC ready, and I believe there are DCC options available for this as well. But because it was a unique locomotive and it actually didn't survive for very long, there's very little in the way of different liveries and such, so you're not going to see like 50 different versions of this produced, I don't expect. Interestingly, I'm not sure what you would call the livery on this locomotive. We might find out more as we go inside, but I don't think I have any other locos that are this sort of colour. At least I don't think so from what I've seen. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so we'll press on. There's very little on the rest of the box, which is good because we can get straight on in. I'm absolutely fascinated to actually finally learn what these models are like after wondering about it for so long. And I have held off. This will be the first time I've opened the box. Look, stop. What is this all about? Right, it says, read this before you use your model. This model has a close couple with the electrics contained. Be careful when removing it from the packaging. There are some fine detail and fragile parts. Please consult the service sheet for maintenance of your model. Okay, very good. I'm getting DJM vibes from that, big stop sign. So I will do that, obviously I will do that before I touch the Locomotive. All right, look at this. I like the look of what we've got here. This is like a proper booklet. Right, KR Models, English Electric GT3, we dare to build. Well, they certainly did, didn't they? They certainly did. Right, oh, look. Cool, this looks all right, doesn't it? So, what have we got here then? GT3, EE's Brave Experiment. All right, so I'm guessing this is a history of the Locomotive. This is actually really, really cool. There are some shots of the internals there. Looks like loads of history on the actual design of the thing. I'm going to actually read that properly later on, but we'll move on for now, see what else we've got. On the back, looks like a little bit of a message from KR Models, talking a bit about the model and I guess all the work that went into it. Yeah, they have actually been very open about this project on their Facebook page. It's worth following actually because they've been sharing CADs and design information all the way along. So I actually feel like I know a lot about this model, even though I've never actually seen it in the flesh yet. Right, okay, this is interesting. So, all right, this looks like the exploded diagram, and this is interesting actually because this is my first look at some of the different parts and components of this. I always jump to the mechanism. I know that might not be everybody's interest, but you can see we have a big chunky motor there. It seems it does have a flywheel. I can see a worm drive there. And then there's all sorts of gears and such on the wheel set. I don't know anything about the mechanisms of this. I will look into it if possible. I don't know if it's all-wheel drive. It looks like it might be. I do remember KR Model showing on their Facebook page that they'd changed it to single-wheel drive, but ultimately I don't know what they settled for in the end, so I guess we will find out. That's very interesting. And then on the other side, what do we have? Looks like spec sheet, gas turbine. Okay, so this must be for the DCC sound fitted version. It gives you a rundown of what the different functions do. Returns policy, warranty. Okay, so is there sort of instructions on what to do, how to couple and stuff? No, it just says please consult the service sheet for maintenance of your model. Okay, well, I guess that means we're ready to go. Are you ready then? Are you ready? Are you ready? I think I'm ready. Oh, wow. Okay. Look at that. And I wasn't kidding about the livery, was I? Yeah, I think it's safe to say nothing else in my collection looks quite like this. Wow, I'll tell you what though, looking at this in the flesh, there's clearly a lot of lining and such on this, which I wasn't really, I guess I was aware of it, but I hadn't really appreciated it until now. Man, let's get this out then, see what this is like. I should say, this seems really heavy, holding it in the hands like this. Seems like a really good chunky model, which I like. Very front heavy as well, actually, so that's pretty cool. Right, I've seen something that intrigues me in the top of the pack here. Have we got a freebie? I think we have. Okay, are you ready? It's a badge. Look at this, an etched badge. GT3. So if you really wanted to, you could go around wearing this. Yes, who dares to do that? KR Models dares to build. Does Sam Strange dare to wear a GT3 badge in public? Well, we'll see about that. Maybe that could be a 100k punishment or something, couldn't it? That's awesome, though. What a cool freebie. And then there is what appears to be a detail bag. Let's take a look. All right, so there's several bits and bobs in here. Some of them I recognise, others I don't. I can see what looks like a cosmetic screw link coupling there. A few other bits and bobs in there as well. Maybe that exploder diagram shows where these go, maybe. I'll have to check that later on. First, though, let's have a look at the Locomotive, shall we? Man, it's been so long. All right, nice sort of traditional packaging here. It's pretty good with the plastic. Whoa, look at this. This is something I hadn't really noticed before. It's got a real shine to it. I love that. So it doesn't look like cheap plastic straight out of the box. That's good news, isn't it? Right, so is the Loco and Tender coupled straight away? Let's see. Yeah, it is actually. So I'm going to be very, very careful until I know actually what is holding these two together. I certainly won't dangle the Loco by the Tender or anything. Whoa. What an absolutely bizarre Locomotive this is. I honestly have never seen anything like this. I know that is stating the obvious a little bit, but seriously, this is very, very unusual indeed, isn't it? Right. Wow, well, this thing looks really, really cool. It looks just like the various photos that I've looked at of the GT3, which is obviously quite a good sign. Let's turn it upside down a little bit. So there's the coupling. It's quite a wide coupling, isn't it? That is it just a push fit? I'm guessing so. I guess I'll try and uncouple that later on. I won't mess around with it too much while I'm holding it like this though. It feels like the body is all kind of plastic construction. However, there's clearly a die-cast chassis or an element of die-cast inside this because, like I say, it does feel very, very heavy. Yeah, it looks like, in some areas, it looks like quite a simple locomotive. I mean, on the side, there's none of the pipe work or whatever you'd have on the traditional steam loco. But around the front, you can see there's quite a lot of detail going on there. Yeah, it's a really, really strange one. This is very, very much so. And I'm liking it already. It's just the kind of thing that appeals to me, to be honest with you. So we will take a close look at this in just a second. First of all, though, here's a little bit of history on the GT3s in real life. GT then, of course, stands for gas turbine, and the number 3 indicates this as being the third design in a short line of gas turbine locomotives, the previous ones being of the 18,000 series. Now, this particular one, the GT3, was a single example, and it was completed as a prototype in 1961 by English Electric. The locomotive somewhat resembles a steam one, albeit a very unusual one, I suppose, yet clearly the internals were very unconventional. The tender, for instance, was filled with kerosene rather than coal or water, and rather than using steam for propulsion, a gas turbine sucks air in from the front, so you should be able to see a fan there somewhere. The air is then compressed and sprayed with the kerosene fuel, and then the mixture is of course ignited, and in doing so great thrust is produced, and apparently the same principle is used in jet engines on aeroplanes, which I didn't realise. In the GT3 locomotive though, rather than having a thruster fitted to the back of the tender or something, which would be insane, but I guess that's an interesting idea for an experiment, the thrust produced was harnessed by a turbine instead, which would be ultimately coupled to the middle driving wheel, I believe, in real life, the centre axle for actual propulsion. Now, they did say that this thing delivered quite decent performance overall, but despite this, it was decided that gas turbines were not as practical as the emerging diesel locomotive designs were, and nothing ever came of them really. The GT3, for example, remained the only of its kind built, and it was eventually put into storage where it was slowly dismantled before being scrapped altogether. With that though, let's take a close look at the model. So there it is then, the KR Models GT3 gas turbine up close and personal for the first time. And you know what, just like most models, there are pros and cons with this locomotive. However, overall, I think this is fantastic. It was just amazing that I've looked and looked and looked at pictures of the real thing and pictures of the model, and to finally see it brought to life in person like this is quite marvellous, isn't it? And the way that this is presented is marvellous. We'll start off with some of the pros, shall we? First of all, the weight is absolutely phenomenal. So this weighs in at 501 grams, which makes this one of the heaviest locomotives I've ever measured. I think only the Garrett and the Princess Royal from Hornby in steam, I think they're the only heavier ones. I do have a few heavier diesels, but it is very, very heavy, much heavier than the latest Hornby A2/2. So hopefully pulling power and traction should be absolutely fine. The second major pro with this is the finish. This is far from a cheap plasticky looking model, which is just great given the price tag. I mean, for £185, if this had that sort of horrible plasticky matte finish, I'd probably have quite a lot to say about it. But yeah, look at the sheen of the bodywork. Probably quite important. I mean, in real life, presumably this thing would have been made of sheet metal, which would have had a bit of a sheen to it, particularly when new. And this model really does reflect that beautifully. Another thing that this model does really, really well is the lining. Look at this, it is impeccable, isn't it really? Some places the lining is quite simple, in other places, around this grille for instance, it's quite complex. If that piece was not positioned absolutely accurately before the print, that would have come out wonky, wouldn't it? So I think the decoration definitely deserves some praise. It's not 100% perfect in every area. I mean, the cab windows are a little bit questionable perhaps. Perhaps a second coat maybe would have done better there, because you can see where the paint is missing a little bit. There are a few issues like that with the model, but we'll come on to those a little bit later on. Some of the details are fantastic as well. I mean, the grille at the front here, I think this is the main thing. It's very three-dimensional, this. There's several different layers going on. So you've got the grille at the forefront, and then you've got some of the internals behind there, which is all sort of separately fitted. Looks really, really good, gives the model some depth, which is fantastic. Same thing around the front, really. You can, well, it's a bit difficult to see from some angles. It's perhaps not quite as prominent as in real life, but there is indeed a fan behind that grille on the front there as well. And all of this just helps to bring the illusion to life, doesn't it? And look at all of the separately fitted details around the front as well. You've got the head code discs and such, and what look like possibly directional lights. I did see on the sort of information sheet that I read, I did see 1 or 2 mentions of directional lighting, so maybe this model is complete with lights. That should be awesome. Another thing I really like is the foot plate. Look at this, there's this sort of separately fitted texture piece which runs along the top of that. Again, that is very, very realistic. I love the texture on that. Again, brings the Locomotive to life. Yeah, I really love this thing. I like unusual locomotives, I've said that before. It really doesn't get much more unusual than this, does it? So for me, this is a definite winner. However, there are 1 or 2 cons with the Locomotive. First of all, it's a little bit plasticky. I'm not talking about the bodywork because the weight is absolutely adequate, but some of the details, for instance, are a little bit on the plasticky side. The buffers, for example, I mean, it's not a problem at all that these are just plastic. However, parts like that do tend to look a little bit better when they're made of metal, and of course, given the price, the more metal, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Also, the springiness, they are sprung, I should say, they are sprung buffers, which is a great detail. But the springing there is very, very feeble, so that is strictly cosmetic. I don't think you'd really be able to use that in any practical circumstance. Plasticky also are the handrails around the cab. I mean, you can sort of tell that these are plasticky because you can see where they've been sort of cut off the sprue, and if you touch them, you can see they do flex quite noticeably. The knock-on effect also being that they don't quite have the metallic finish that the handrails would in real life. If I bring up a photo, you can see the handrails do look quite metallic. On this model, that's not the case. The handrails that run along the length of the body, they do seem a little bit more sturdy than the ones on the cab. Whether or not those are made of metal, I'm not sure, but again, they do have that sort of plasticky finish, which contrasts with the rest of the model, which comparatively speaking, looks really quite metallic and impressive. In some areas, the model is also a little bit on the basic side. The cab interior, for instance, it's quite good that we've got some cab detail inside there, but there's certainly no decoration or anything inside there, so you really would have to use your imagination there. The glazing is all done quite nicely as well, and because this locomotive works unlike a steam locomotive, the cab is fully enclosed at the back as well. There is sort of no easy access between loco and tender, besides those doors, as you can see. But still, a little bit more in the way of cab detail might have been nice. Same thing goes with the GT3 plate as well. I mean, on a modern, quality, expensive locomotive, you would sort of expect the separately fitted etched name and number plates and such, whereas these are just a part of the moulding and the colour has just been printed on. That's the same with the, presumably, the builder's plate over at the front here. Just a part of the moulding, which is just a little bit on the basic side for such an expensive model, isn't it? And moving on from there, there are 1 or 2 areas of very slight crudeness. I mean, the front buffer beam, for example, it is clear that this part is just screwed on. In fact, the screws are quite visible from the outside, and the ladders are also quite noticeably wonky as well. And as you can see, they are kind of free to flex, which means maybe I could straighten them, but that has spoilt the illusion very, very slightly. You've got 1 or 2 parts that are not a perfect fit. The grills on the top, as you can see, they do stand proud from the body a little bit, and they do move when you touch them. And also parts of the metal chassis are poking proud of the bodywork, as you can see in quite a few areas, which again just ruins the illusion very, very slightly. One thing I do like are the wheels. As you can see, they are properly moulded wheels. You don't have the unrealistic axles poking through, and you've got the characteristic sort of huge crank pins, although the crank pins themselves are not actually huge, but the coupling rods on this loco are a very, very unusual design. Again though, just a little bit of crudeness in the way the wheels have been manufactured. You can see the centre one particularly there has got quite a bit of scratching visible there, and it's just little things like that that let the model down, because otherwise the quality is really quite good. These are things I feel I have to mention on a model that costs this much money. Overall, I don't really think there's a major issue with the quality, but there are 1 or 2 minor issues that you just wouldn't expect at this kind of price tag. Perhaps one of the major ones for me is the loco to tender connection, which isn't as intuitive as we've seen on other locomotives. I think the Dapol solution is the best I've seen for this, because it is a sort of push and pull fit, as you can see. So if I pull it apart like this, you can see they do snap apart reasonably easily, but then this frightened me when I first did this. You can see we've got the pins exposed here, and one of them over there on the top right even looks a little bit bent, doesn't it? So that suggests that this coupling is quite fragile, and then when you try to push them back together, oh, I don't like this, they don't really go back together. The 2 pieces sort of force each other upwards and they don't go back together. That is not pleasant when you've got sort of bare metal pins poking out there. If you're the kind of person that wants to decouple this after every time you've used it, I would recommend being very, very cautious with this because I really don't know how long that's going to last. How to get them back together is a bit awkward, actually. I sort of lift the tender up a little bit and try and push them together. Oh, it's really not nice, though. Hang on a second. So I'm going to have to try and keep these two coupled together semi-permanently, which again introduces its own issues because then you've got a delicate coupling that you've got to be mindful of when you're lifting up and down the loco. So yeah, that's not fantastic, but hopefully it will actually work, and hopefully when I try this thing, there will actually be a solid connection between the loco and tender. Speaking of the tender then, it feels a bit funny calling this a tender because obviously it doesn't contain coal and water. I believe tender is still the correct term though, so fair enough, I suppose. Again, the decoration and the finish is absolutely sublime on this. So the lining is absolutely perfect. You've got this, the Vulcan Foundry logo. I think that's the first time I've ever seen that on a model before, which is really cool. And then you've got all sorts of gauges. I'm guessing that might be the pressure for the kerosene. I'm not too sure. Maybe that's the case. Can't really read what the gauges say. You've got warning prints on there. The axle boxes have got print work on them. The lower chassis has got sort of ladders separately fitted to it, which is pretty nice. On the top, you've got this sort of cover / grille, whatever it is, that is separately fitted. And around the back you have a door and some windows. No interior, unfortunately, inside this, which is a shame. I read somewhere that there was a toilet inside in the real thing. Maybe that I'm thinking of something else there, but if that's true, it would have been really cool to see a bog in there or something. That's a kind of a joke though, I'm not too serious about that. And one thing I do love is the way the roof of the tender sort of matches the roof of the back of the locomotive. So it all looks like it belongs to the same machine, doesn't it? This sort of loco and tender sort of fit together perfectly. And I must say the close coupling between the loco and tender looks pretty good. I think that's quite crucial. If you had a sort of a big inch gap between the two, I think that would be a much less convincing look, wouldn't it? Okay, so around the back, we've got more of those sprung buffers, very, very loose indeed. You've got the NEM couplings fitted already into the pockets. That is true of the front bogie as well. I just realised I haven't showed you the front bogie there. There it is. I think that is a die-cast piece, actually, and it does look good for it. You see what I mean about the die-cast there? It's got a great sheen to it, and that is true of most of the model, except for the handrails. So there we go. Overall, fantastic looking locomotive. Perhaps the level of detail and the fidelity isn't quite up to the standard of some manufacturers, but if you consider that this is KR Model's first ever locomotive, and when you consider that there's very little information on the GT3 out there, what have they got? Photographs? Maybe they were lucky enough to find some diagrams. They certainly couldn't go and see the thing in real life because it's not been around for decades. So I think taking everything into account, overall this is quite impressive. Value for money, I suppose that will depend on the mechanism and how well this performs, but overall I think there is some potential here, isn't there? So I'm going to investigate the mechanism. We'll get this onto the track for the very first time and see how this performs. This should be very, very interesting. Alright folks, the GT3 is down onto the track, ready for the first ever test, and I think this should be really, really interesting because overall the mechanism is okay, no major issue with the mechanisms. The loco does have tender pickups first of all, but they're quite strange tender pickups. As you can see, rather than having wipers or anything like that, we've got two metal plates that run in line with the axle boxes, and then they collect power from the tender wheels via the axles, the outside of the axles. And actually, provided it works all right, which is yet to be seen, I really like that design. It's really smart. There should be very little friction from that. They're very discreet. And in the past, when I've seen this done, I think the Dapol track cleaning car has a similar sort of arrangement. It does work very reliably, which is good because the loco also has pickups, but only two on the driving wheels. As you can see, the rear set doesn't have a pickup on it for whatever reason, which means that there is going to be quite some reliance on the tender pickups, so hopefully they will work properly. The front bogie is quite basic, as you can see. There are no pickups on that, and actually I'm not too keen on the design of the front bogie. I might even go as far as to say it's a bit of a bodge, actually, because it's held in place by a screw, right? And as you can see, that bogie is allowed to spring. If you tighten that screw up all of the way, the bogie becomes perfectly rigid, cannot move at all, cannot spring at all, which means in order for this to work properly, that screw has got to be halfway loose, meaning the front bogie is held in place by a loose screw, which means it's going to work itself free and drop off. And indeed, during the disassembly, the front bogie did indeed drop off. I don't know whether it's just my example that's faulty, but that needs addressing. That's a very poor design right there. But I'm not seeing any other shoddy design work really. If I remove the base keeper plate, you can see we do have a proper set of bearings on all of the driving axles. That's really good. That's a top quality feature. And you can see that, yes, it is, just like in real life, the centre axle that is driven by the motor. You can see that the tooling does have the provision to have every single axle driven. I think, yes, I think including the back one as well, but they have not utilised that, which is fine. Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to do that. The real things would use the coupling rods to transmit power between the driving wheels. No reason why the models can't, and in fact, that's quite a standard thing. Removing the body of the Loco wasn't too difficult, and it does reveal this absolute monster of a chassis. Really, really heavy, this chassis. Very, very good indeed. There is the motor, very substantial motor. Not sure whether it's 3 or 5 pole, but it does look substantial, and it is fitted with a flywheel, which is great. And that is hooked up to this drive shaft which connects to the gear train, and therefore the motor is completely isolated from the gear train, which should reduce vibrations and such, and that flywheel should smoothen the motion of the motor. So that's all really, really good. You've got a little circuit board above the cab, suggesting we do have a cab light, so that's really good. What a nice feature that is. And then over at the front you can see there are 2 LEDs for the front lights as well, and I love that these have been put into sort of a plastic light box. That should reduce any light bleed at all. It's really, really nice design. The tender was a bit more difficult. Obviously that's where the socket is, so most people are going to want to open up their tenders. There's no instructional material as to how the tender opens. Now in the end it was quite simple. It was just a case of popping the body off, and to a manufacturer that's been working with this thing for years, that might seem quite self-explanatory. But for someone like me who has bought this at great expense and who was worried about damaging it, it would be nice just to have a little instruction book just to explain all of this, just so that you know that what you're doing is right, because it wasn't very nice having to sort of jam my fingernails underneath the body to try and rip it off, not knowing whether that was the right thing or not. Anyway, it was the right thing. You can see the chassis is full of big weights there. It's quite modular. Everything is just plugged in. There's no sort of hard wiring, which is really nice. That means you can exchange parts quite easily if you need to. There are lights in the tender. I think that might be an LED on that circuit board there, which is pretty good. And also there is the DCC decoder socket. Nice easy access to that, so you can chip this quite easily if you want to. And finally, the gauge was all right. The Loco driving wheels I gauged at between 14.5 and 14.6. They were a little bit inconsistent, tiny little bit tight according to the 00 Gauge Association, but no major issue. That is in line with most other models. The back-to-back was a little tight, front-to-back absolutely fine. So yeah, the mechanism, no major complaints. Not keen on that front bogie. I can see that dropping off, and look, if I lift it up slightly, you can see it doesn't have much travel before the driving wheels start being lifted off the track. So that is a bit of a design issue, I would guess. I might have to look at that if the Loco's pulling power isn't what it ought to be given its weight. However, let's give this the first ever test, shall we? It's not been running yet, so don't expect it to be at its best, but let's see if the thing actually works, shall we? Here we go then, turning up. It does. So that means that the tender is connected properly. And look at that. Cool. Not running, folks, not running. And yet, that is a really beautiful crawl. How can that be? KR Models, as first model, runs better than most of Hornby's Locos of this size. Remember those A4s and the A3s I've been looking at? They couldn't do this. It's a really nice runner. I can see that the lights are working as well. Let me show you that. Front lights. Cool, look at that. They all light up. How is that happening? There must be one of those sort of light plastic acrylic light channels or something on the inside. Cool. That's very clever. Yeah, I'm not sure how they've done that, but that is working marvellously well. On the back, yeah, we do have the tail lights, which are working, only in the forward direction. And it seems we've got a cab light as well. I think the cab light is red. That's unusual. Is that prototypical then? A red cab light? Do the drivers double as photographers or something? Oh, that's interesting. No, the performance is really nice. I'm pleasantly surprised. So you know what? KR Models, they must have found the right people to do this job. Either that or they came up with this design themselves. I'm not sure entirely how it works, but whatever the case may be, This is a competent design. It looked reasonably competent on the inside, and the performance matches. I mean, usually Loco will get better with some running in. If this gets better, it's going to be damn near the best performer I've got. Come on then, just for the record, let's get this to do the absolute slowest crawl it can do, because obviously when a Loco exhibits a really decent crawl, that usually suggests that the quality of the mechanism is high. Look at that. Wow. That is a stunningly good performer. Well done, KR models. I mean, a Loco can be nicely detailed, but for me, if it runs well, that is 3/4 of the battle won. That's delightful. Nice. Very nice. Right, come on then, let's get it going around the layout. Will it derail on the curves? I'm not sure about that front bogie. If it does, my eyes will dart straight to that front bogie, because that's dodgy. But the rest of it seems fine. Right, this will be a good test of the Loco and tender coupling as well on curves. Here we go. So I like the speed. That seems fairly competent. That's 50% right there. There we go around the curve. Bit of a slowdown there. But obviously it's early days, maybe that will improve as running in goes on, maybe it won't. I shouldn't think the gauging, ooh, and again, maybe it's catching on scenery actually, it's a strange shape, isn't it? But no, it seems like the Loco and tender connection, it's not the neatest solution in the world, but it does seem to be working. There doesn't seem to be any issue with the connection. I think the lights and the motor and such just wouldn't work if there were any connection issues. So that's really impressive, seems a good runner. Let's watch it go. Uh-oh. I told you that front bogie would be a problem. I might try and tighten it up a little bit, but I'm really conscious of the fact that tightening it up all the way will just remove all of that springiness. Doesn't do that every time though. So it did keep derailing, unfortunately, to the point where I've had to make a bit of an adjustment to the front bogie. So now the spring is gone. I've done away with the spring, and I've just put a really large smooth washer in there, which has made the motion of the front bogie a lot smoother, and less of the Loco's weight is now resting on that front bogie, and as you can see, it's now not derailing anymore. So, I mean, I called it, to be honest, didn't I? As soon as I clapped eyes on that front bogie, I thought, something ain't right with that. And it's definitely causing issues on the track. Now don't get me wrong, my track is not perfect by any means. If you get one of these, there's a good chance you won't have any issues with it at all, but because of that front bogie design, the Loco is quite sensitive to track work. But with that small modification, the Loco is now working properly, which is good to see. So it's a shame about that front bogie, because overall the design was fantastic. I'm going to have to mark it down for that, but it was easy enough to fix. And otherwise the performance is lovely, very, very lovely. So I'll let this run in and see you shortly. Okay folks, there we go, running in has concluded, and yes, that did not go without issue. I've actually had to spend quite a lot of time experimenting with that front bogie to get it right, but now I am quite happy with it, and I have been able to get some good reliable running out of this, and the performance is really, really good. So the washer that I put between the chassis and the front bogie worked really, really well. I didn't have any derailments with it, but I found that the bogie wheels were taking too much of the Loco weight and slightly lifting the front driving wheels off the track. So while the performance was great, the pulling power was greatly diminished. So what I've ended up doing instead is I've done away with the washer, I've done away with the spring, and I've extended the screw as far as I dare so that the bogie wheels are sort of just hanging over the rails, just sitting onto them with gravity, but they're not taking any of the Loco's weight anymore. And that means that I've got maximum pulling power. It's not ideal though, because if you tighten that screw up too much, the bogie ends up sort of dangling above the rails, particularly if your track isn't perfectly level all the way around. And conversely, if the screw is too loose, it's just going to work its way out and not be any good. So yeah, the front bogie design is far from ideal, and if you've got a layout with lots of inclines and things on it, I would seriously not recommend getting one of these, because I think it's going to be a lot of trouble. Touch wood though, I have been able to sort mine out now. Shouldn't have to, of course, and I'm not very impressed that I've actually had to spend time fixing the thing to make it work properly, but your mileage may vary. Anyway, let's see what the actual crawl is like now that we've had a full run in. It's very good, I must say. The mechanism is excellent. Very, very competent speed, beautifully smooth. I would say that, if anything, is slightly better than before. We are a bit further forward now, we're over the express points, so let's give it a little bit more juice. It's not dreadfully constant actually, it is speeding up and slowing down a little bit, but crucially it's not cutting out on the points, which is good. The pulling power is quite immense. I measured 0.54 newtons, which is right up there with the heaviest of the Pacifics. I'm quite impressed with that. And so to test the pulling power, I've got just 6 teaks. It's obviously not anywhere close to 32 coaches, but I do have gradients and curves on my layout. So that will make a difference, of course. Let's go couple to them and do a bit of a running session then. Nice and steady. There we go. Hopefully that's a coupling, was it? Slightly different couplings on those coaches, so I wasn't sure, but yeah, it looks like we have got a coupling there. Very nice. And let's set it off at a nice round 50 speed. There you go. There we go, and at this speed it's very, very nice and constant. It's a good runner, very good runner overall. Okay, on the, well, I'll better tell you today's theme to start with. It's going to be sort of unique experimental locomotives. It's that kind of ilk. So up here we have the 10,000, the LMS 10,000 with some Pullmans. Obviously that is one of Britain's very first diesel locomotives, so I think that qualifies with the rough theme. And then on the inside line I have an A4, which is obviously not an experimental locomotive, but it does have the experimental purple livery, as you can see. So let's catch up with the GT3. I will show you what it looks like running without derailments, and yeah, see which other experimental or unusual or unique locos you can spot. Okay, there you go. As you can see, it's a good run at that, and it's really not slowing down so much around those curves anymore, which is great. But yeah, now that those issues are sorted, it's a good runner. It's a really, really nice runner. Doesn't slow down too much on Gordon's Hill, which is great. Nice, reliable performance. Obviously, those tender pickups are doing their job, and I think that is a design that we should definitely see more of, because there's so little friction. The pickups don't squeak because they're not wiping against the wheels. Yeah, it's a really, really nice design, and at the moment it seems reliable. I'll keep you posted on how that is. It is quite amusing that it's always the front bogie that throws new manufacturers. I remember Oxford Rail had very much a similar problem with their first locomotive, the Adams radial tank. Yeah, I suppose this one was a bit easier to fix than that. And please do let me know if you've got a GT3. Have a look at the front bogie screw. Is mine just a one-off fault, or is yours loose as well? I don't see how mine could be a one-off fault, but I'm open to the possibility of it. But no, I mean, moving past that now, lovely runner. I think the lights look marvellous. I'll try and get a few shots from the front. Yeah, that full range of lights on the front there looks absolutely epic. Really like the lights. Good brightness as well. They're subtle enough so that they don't look unrealistic, but they're bright enough so that you can actually see them. That's something that manufacturers don't always get right. So that's really good. Looks fantastic. I think the finish is one of the best facets of the model. Beautiful, almost, it's not quite glossy, because you say glossy and you start to think, you know, shiny plastic toy-like things. It's not quite glossy, but it's a bit more than just satin, which I think is just a really, really nice balance. And for KR models to have gotten that right straight away with their first model is a really good sign of what's to come. Let's have some ratings then for the GT3 from KR Models. Level of detail, I was stuck. I didn't know whether to give it 3-star or 4-star, so I've gone for 3.5. There's a lot of great stuff to be praised on the level of detail. The finish is marvellous, real quality finish. The decoration, all of the lining and such, really, really good. And there are some really nice details in there as well. However, the lack of cab decoration lets it down a little bit. You've got the plastic handrails, the non-etched builder's plate and GT3 plate, the plastic buffers, the lack of tender interior detail. Yeah, it's just there could have been 1 or 2 things that were slightly better. Performance, again, was going to be 4-star, but I have knocked it down to 3.5. 1 star for the derailments. I mean, it's okay now, but as it was straight out of the box, couldn't get around the track, so it can't get 5-star for that. Knocked off another 0.5 star for the slight lack of smoothness. Yeah, it does seem to fluctuate in terms of speed a little bit, which is strange because there's obviously plenty of torque there. However, it must be said at the higher speeds going forwards, and now that I've made the modifications, it's very, very smooth, great consistency around the track, and the crawl is fantastic as well. Pulling power though is absolutely fantastic. At 32 coaches, 0.54 newtons, that's about the same as a heavy Pacific, and I think that is the most pulling power I've ever seen out of a 460. Could be wrong, but it's very, very powerful. 32 coaches on straight and level track. No problems with that at all. Mechanism, again, the mechanism is great. I love the design of the tender pickups, they work incredibly well. Proper bearings on the wheel set, single driven axle, big beefy motor with flywheel, nice easy access to the decoder socket. Again, it's just that front bogie, you can't give a Loco 5-star on mechanism when there's a fundamental flaw in the front bogie design there. Quality then, again, it's very nearly perfect. I love the weight, there's an awful lot of weight to this one. The paintwork's very good and accurate, however, I would want the metal handrails and the metal buffers and the paintwork to be 100% spot on everywhere in order to give this 5-star on quality. But again, I wouldn't say there's a quality issue, it's just not 100%, but overall, yeah, great quality, no problem at all. Value for money then, £185, that's what I paid. The new price for these is going to be £199. And to be honest, we've seen worse value locomotives out there, but for £200, is this really the most complex loco in the world? No, I don't think so, not really. There's not an awful lot of pipe work, there's no valve gear to model on this, for instance. It is a reasonably basic model, but for all intents and purposes. If everything was 100% perfect, I might have been prepared to give this 4 stars, but given the issues I've had as well, yeah, I'm not really sure it's worth the money. Kudos to KR Models, of course. Obviously, they don't have the massive resources that the likes of Hornby and Bachmann and such do, but that's from the manufacturer's point of view. From the customer's point of view, they want to get what they've paid for, so I have to be quite objective with that. It's not terrible though, I don't feel ripped off or anything. Overall then, that is a fair score of 7.58 out of 10. That's pretty good, that's pretty average, isn't it? Not bad at all for a first locomotive from KR Models. Into the logbook it goes then. There it is, 7th, just above the A4 and below the Webb coal tank. Overall, if you're okay with the issues and you're okay with the reasonably high price, I can recommend this without any problems. It's a really cool model, and overall it does do what it's supposed to. So while I do have 1 or 2 minor complaints, overall I'm pretty happy with the model. So there you go then folks, that is my review of the GT3 from KR Models. Do let me know down in the comments what you think about this. Have I been too generous? Have I been too harsh? I feel like I might have been a little bit generous with this, but I did want my score to reflect what this loco does well, and I think it does quite a lot well. But to be absolutely clear, there are 1 or 2 issues with this, and whether or not you buy this locomotive will depend on how much you care about these issues, how good you are with your hands, how much you mind about having to make little adjustments to things like the front bogie, and how much you're willing to spend for a relatively unique locomotive. Overall, I think the pros do outweigh the cons. However, it is entirely subjective. So yeah, I've presented all the evidence to you. Obviously, you're completely free to make up your own minds on this one. But sure, I personally, I will be looking into more of KR Models locomotives. I think this is a great start, and I think if they do improve as time goes on, which usually manufacturers do, I think they could become a real player in this industry, and they kind of are already with some of the things they've announced. A lot of people are very, very interested in the company, and I think you can count me among them, because this has really whetted my appetite for what they're capable of. It's a great first model, isn't it? I suppose it's one of the best first models we've seen. It's really, really decent. I'm quite pleased with it overall. So thank you very, very much for watching. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for your company. And I will see you very, very soon for another review. All right. Cheers, everybody.